The Allender Center is pleased to announce the upcoming marriage conference on October 21st and 22nd at Mill City Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. This conference will also be live streamed so you can join us from the comfort of your own home. Join Dr. Dan Allender and Becky Allender, co-founders of the Allender Center, and Dr. Steve Call and Lisa Call, co-founders of the Reconnect Institute, for a conference that beckons you to an honest exploration of who you are, how your story impacts your style of relating within your marriage, and what you and your partner create together in light of your unique stories. Whether you have been married for many years, are in a long-term relationship, are single, dating, or preparing to be married, this conference is for those who want to engage Scripture in a provocative, meaningful way, and to those who desire a deeper faith and deeper relationships with others and God. You can find out more about the marriage conference and register for in-person or live stream tickets at theallendercenter.org/events.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, the fall is upon us, and I have the great privilege of being with my beloved wife, talking about the beginning of the fall and the end of the summer. It's sort of that transitional period where, at least in my body, I'm not really ready fully and completely to give up the summer, but the fall has come, September has arrived, and it's time to live into a different season. If you know much about the weather of Seattle, in some ways, July and August, September bear some of the greatest beauty, sun, light, etc. But as we move to October and November, it does begin to alter. So there is a degree, not fully yet, in which I am sort of relinquishing one season, kind of putting on slightly different clothes for this. But this transitional period, we just find it so important to not just move on, not just kind of go, okay, time for the fall, school clothes, binders, etc. But it's really important to, in some sense, let go and put on. Take off, put on, not only clothing, not only attitude, but in some sense to be able to go from one season to the next with some degree of ownership and appreciation. So if I can ask it this way, Becky, how was your summer? Given that I lived a good portion of it with you, I'm still quite curious. How was your summer?
Oh, our summer was good, and we had some low points. But yeah, it's so hard to say goodbye to summer. It just is. And I think for some reason this was harder than normal for me, because in some regard I get ready for the fall and I like routine. So I look forward to that. But yeah, we're still kind of in between the two.
Yeah. So if I ask it a little bit more particular, what were the low points? What were the high points? When we think about trying to move from one season to the next, I think there is some level of putting words to the experiences of highs and lows, goods, things that brought some degree of disappointment or heartache. So from that vantage,
Well, I think some of the highs were the same as the lows. We had the opportunity of hosting our son and his wife and their two children, age 5 and 10, in our home all summer, which had great joy and also great complexity. And then when other families, our two daughters, when they would come with their children and their husbands, it just makes for a very complex weekend or evening. That's my disappointment, that I just can't hold it easily.
Yeah, to underscore, as much as we love, delight, in having our family with us. I'll at least use the word, I'm exhausted. And I don't know how much is their growing age and complexity, my and our growing age, but there is that sense of we love when they come and we love when they depart.
That's true.
And where were the points of complexity for you that opened the door to what we're really wanting to address is that part of letting go, we think it requires some engagement with disappointment. And the moment you open up disappointment, you're opening up the issue of disillusionment, of demands, of, in many ways, the things of our own, we'll just say, our own struggle with life itself, let alone the particularities of time and people.
So that was a long question. I'm just saying how I was disappointed in it's usually I'm disappointed in myself because I'm very much of a doer and a need order for my head to feel on correctly. So I always long for to have been able just to sit with a child or sit with children and not worry about the chaos of the house or the kitchen or the yard even. So I'm pretty hard on myself that way. And I don't have to stay completely in that because there were victories, but I'm more aware of the downside of myself.
So I'm assuming that disappointment also has to do, at least in what you put words to some degree of identity, like how you ought to be with regard to a child sitting and reading versus attending to the kitchen that feels like a tornado has ripped through.
Yes. I want to be more of that grandparent that sits on the porch swing and reads or lets them read to me. I want to be that more, and I never seem to be that enough.
Well, and I think this is a good point of contrast. I'm just more aware of the disappointment in others. I can easily tune in to the reality of being disappointed with that I was not patient, that I didn't take more time to, this morning, with a few days left before the full-fledged arrival of fall, I was out with two grandsons, actually three, but two in particular, to work on their casting, to help them, shall we say, progress in the eventuality of fly fishing together sometime this fall. And it's not an easy sport to learn, but there are some basics that if you simply follow a core rule or two, things will work out okay. But I could feel myself saying again and again, no, don't break your wrist. No, bring the rod up to your ear, 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, a few core rules, and their patience waned after, I'm going to say 90 seconds.
Yeah, it wasn't very long. Or 3.
And I could feel that, come on, you guys, you're going to have so much fun if you'll just learn these few basics. That's what's internal. And I could feel that coming across. So I'm aware of disappointing myself, but somehow I'm more clear of the disappointments of our family that we thought would be with us for a week, but ended up spending time with friends, ended up spending time with other family members. And we got so little compared to what I thought we would have. Those are the kind of moments that just sort of linger as, what do I do with desire that seems to be at war with my own heart and with the hearts of others?
It's so much easier just to kill that desire because I think I didn't set myself up to think, oh, they're going to be here for a week, because it was more like 2.5 days. spread apart over 7 days. And that's just so little time. So I think that I actually kill desire a little bit to monitor my own heart. So,
well, and again, the bind is, for most of us, we either diminish or kill desire, as you put it, or desire becomes a movement toward resentment. A movement toward, it's just not right. It's not fair. Why are we not getting more than what we thought we ought to have? And in that, it's where I would say almost all disappointment helps us enter into illusions, how we think life ought to be. And again, so often, those illusions feel so legitimate that to even put it into the category of illusion, it's really the word expectation. But in the word expectation, you have not only demand of what should be, but you've got this often fantasy of how the world or how a visit or how an interaction with fly rods and a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old ought to go. All that leads to the reality of it's so much to actually tend to disappointment and not quit or feel indulgent and demand. So if I can come back to you, my beloved, where did disappointment lead you as you have come into a bit of this transition for the fall?
well, I think it just comes back to just being impatient with myself. And that's such a circular roadway down to the bottom. And so I would think I would be better at this by now.
That's back to the word illusion.
Yes. It's like, haven't I felt that loneliness of having cleaned up while they were around? And I need to let that go. And because things do need to be finished, they do need to be kind of straightened up. But I again, that's my tendency to find fault with just dealing with chaos.
Yeah. Well, and again, to ask the question again, what are the illusions you find actually being exposed through facing disappointment? And that's again something that we're going to try and evolve a thought process for you, for us. And that is, if disappointment only leads to, damn it, it didn't work again, why do I even bother? You have, in one sense, leaned into an approach to desire that annuls, at some level annihilates, and will not, in one sense, intensify your own growing capacity to be human, to be alive, to be rich with desire, but also free from demand. So that framework of asking, so where did disappointment with yourself, where has it begun to move you?
Actually, it's moved me to Philippians in particular, just to have a new beginning, just to get my eyes off myself and to trust in so many promises that Paul speaks to in those 4 chapters.
Anything in particular?
Well, I happened to read Philippians as I was pondering this podcast, and coming upon chapter 4, where rejoice in the Lord always. This is chapter 4, verse 4. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I mean, just reading that, it encourages me. It takes my eyes off my failure, off what I would want to have been as a grandmother, wife, mother. It just settles me. It's like, yeah, it gives me hope.
Well, and what I find in that passage, at least initially, is it almost seems to justify not doing the work we're asking people to do.
Well, I didn't intend for that.
No, I think it's a good issue for us to explore. And that is, when you own disappointment, it does not look like rejoicing. When you're indeed engaging something of this intersection between disappointment and disillusionment and demands, it feels like the spade work. It feels like you're digging into the dirt. Why can't we just go to the good fruit? And I think in some ways, what you're ending with in Philippians 4 required a whole lot through the first 3 chapters of, in some sense, doing the hard work of digging, of owning that the conflicts that he's dealing with in the city of Philippi basically boils down to huge conflicts, huge disappointment, a failure truly of living out something of the wonder of the gospel. So you're coming, I think, beautifully to where we need to land, but the labor to get there requires, shall we say, the contextual labor of entering into conflict, disappointment, in some sense, the reality of the fly fishing lesson didn't go well. Some of the visit of our family this summer did not go as we desire. And I think my inclination, as somebody who likes to solve problems, is how can I do it better? Mm-hmm. How can I do it different? What got in the way? What can be done understanding to resolve versus just allowing myself to experience that there will be some degree of disappointment with everything.
Yeah.
Nothing will be as we desire. And I can choose to limit what it is I desire and therefore make it appear that I'm rejoicing when all I've actually done is thinned out desire so that I don't have to face something of that gritty, dirty complexity that comes whenever you've got, at least in our case, 10 people living in the same house between the ages of 2 and 70. And I mean, just trying to decide what we're going to watch.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah.
So back to that question of where has disappointment opened the door for you to rejoice?
I think I'm still thinking of an incident that might fit into what you're asking, but I think when we were all going to go to the beach together and how we had waited hours or took hours to finally get to that moment, there was a lot of packing, there was a lot of organizing, there was a lot of towels, cars. It seemed overwhelming. And then at the last minute, when most everyone's in the car or headed that way, one of our granddaughters, Grace, she just kind of crumpled on the floor in our hallway and started crying. And to me, it's like, do you pick her up, get her in the car seat? Let's make this happen. This has been this is our last chance. But it was so clear. I just, as if I heard Jesus say, Becky, just get on the floor with her. And it was like, yeah. And then looking at you in the doorway and just saying, I'm staying here. I'm staying with Grace. And it's the very thing my heart longed for was time with one grandchild without the chaos of the other people. And it didn't start out great. It ended up wonderfully, but it was treacherous territory for a while with a 6-year-old on the floor in our hallway. And the goodness of pursuing her, attuning my heart, my eyes, my body towards her, allowing her to be silent for a while until she could begin to say what she was feeling. And I think that was one of the highlights of my summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is part of the disappointment I feel as an older woman, because I'm like, was there a grandparent that attuned to me at one of those moments where I was out of sorts? And you don't know, but I think the older you get, you long for that. You long that you had that. And you even, our longing never goes away. Unfortunately, it's always there. So longing that even as a 70-year-old, that attunement, those times are fleeting, where we get what our heart yearns for. We don't even have words or awareness that that's what we were yearning for.
Yeah. And I don't want to be a word critique here, but you say the word unfortunately. I say fortunately, because you read that child's desire. And it was disruptive. That moment, I think for both of us, I had some fishing that actually was pretty spectacular this summer. So I'm not going to say this was the very best event, but it's one of the top 3 moments of the summer where I'm sort of looking at you and Grace on the floor, and it's like, get up, let's go. This is what we've been planning. And the disappointment of you not coming and of, a plan being derailed. And yet, in seeing that choice of you being with her on the floor, of tending to her, and her parents having the wisdom to not push at that point, we gave up going to the beach. We went to a local coffee shop where there are some fountains that our other granddaughter, Parker, could play in. It was a moment in which the illusion of this is what a good day will be. And you can hear in that illusion the demand of, damn it, we need some significant time with this family alone without anyone else. And all of a sudden, it's being disrupted by this contentious 6-year-old, and then a compliant grandmother who's going along. I am sad that went through my mind at all. Yet there was in the process, not only from the vantage of what happened for the two of you, but a goodness that was there in that I had a chance to be with my son-in-law, with a longer conversation, without, shall we say, the sand and chaos of a beach. So I would go back to say, what do you take from that moment as you go into the fall?
I think the major thing I take is to slow down, to read the room, to read you, to read my own heart. I think to slow down, because none of that would have taken place on that afternoon if I hadn't slowed down and if Grace hadn't melted down. And it was so clear to me as the afternoon wore on that you were in the perfect place to be with our daughter and her husband and Parker. It was perfect. Certainly not at all what we had planned, but how it unfolded felt so holy. It felt so good that Jesus gave us that afternoon, so different than what we had planned.
Yeah. So I think for the framing of how we take the summer into the fall. It's fascinating to me that I have a moment, again, a little too extraneous to go into, but a moment at the end of a day of fishing where Steve and I, getting the boat on the top of our car. We're finished. I'm exhausted, but there's that sense of, I can let down now that the day is over. And in that process, I stepped off the car backwards. It's something of a push, and literally stepped on a boulder that I saw as clearly in the beginning as literally in my face, yet I forgot. And in that forgetfulness, another way of saying it, in the rapid movement without the awareness of my body and my world, I hit that boulder and flipped and took a really significant fall. So when I think about where I bear a kind of, oh, damn it, it's that moment. And I think that's an important phrase. There are, after a whole summer of a slew of wonderful and difficult events, it's nearly impossible to hold them all. But the question of what moments linger, either of sweetness, at least in this case with regard to you and Grace, or like failure, like a failure of awareness that brought, still brings a little bit of physical pain as a result of that. And I think those are moments where instead of just going, what did I learn? But can we enter them and say, what about our humanity has come to the surface? What about desire? What can we do to honor, grieve, but at some level bless what those moments have brought us, even when they have brought us some level of disruption, or in my case, physical pain? And that, for me, is what it means to slow down. Not to move rapidly from that into, well, you just need to be more aware of where you're at, which is equally true.
Yeah, but in that slowing down, what I hear you saying is there is a kindness. There has to be a kindness to have that gaze as you look at your own self. And without that kindness, you could have ruined the last 2 days of your fishing trip. And it seemed like you handled it really well, because you did take a day off, because you did call me. And that was shocking, because you're usually without cell coverage. So then there was that, oh no. But you were a joyful man on a hunt to find ice. And you seemed to have no regrets not to be in the river that day. And I just saw so much maturity in you. I felt it. I just was cheering you on. And that goes back to the kindness. You must have had kindness to your failure of stepping to a flat surface.
Well, that's why I would take us back to that Philippians 4 passage. It was not something like, oh, I'm disappointed. My day has been somewhat ruined because of this fall. I've got demands. I'm going to have to repent. All that's good work. We'll spend more time talking about the process in our next time together. But to at least come back to what was at core, there was a sense in which Jesus was present.
Yeah.
And in that, I don't want to make it hyper spiritual. I don't want to deny the spirituality that Jesus was saying to me, there are things I want to tend to. Now, that day, Steve was fishing and said it was one of the best days that we had ever seen. I didn't see, he had. And I didn't find any degree of like loss or disappointment.
So good, Dan.
But because Jesus was literally going, there are things I'm asking of you to tend to that this fall, a literal fall, has, in one sense, brought to the surface. And I think in one larger sense of our disappointments are not to be ignored. What's there in terms of the illusions that are driving something of that disappointment shouldn't be escaped, nor the fundamental demand of I expect this to occur, and when it doesn't, damn. But there is something in that desire that actually opens the door to a deeper desire. We wanted to go to the beach. We wanted to have time as a family with our larger family. Yet, as it ended up, one of the sweetest parts of your whole summer is this several hours of interacting on the floor, on a trampoline, eventually Grace asking you to read a story to her. I know there is something of the tender glory of Jesus somehow in the middle of that. And when we can begin to get a sense of that kernel, that core, the seed that's there that will actually produce even greater fruit than the result of having what our hearts desire, then there is something that can hold the desire and the disappointment without judgment, but also know there's something else happening that we need to be able to tend to.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like looking down as God was with a greater circumference of focus. It was like I was lifted up to see Jesus, his goodness, his orchestration of the day. It really was stunning. I want to do that more. I long to do that more.
Well, and then the question is then, without trivializing the process, how do we grow, especially as we move into the fall? How do we grow to take all that we have gained through the summer into a new season? And that's what we'll address in but a week. Thank you, my beloved.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
We will be chatting soon.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.